and the first three were introductory. So that the fourth was the first of the translations. This is my translation of the Tao Te Ching. And in order to pace myself, I'm taking 4 chapters per week. And last week we took 4, and this week we'll take 4 more. At this rate, in 20 weeks, we'll have done 80 chapters, so I'll have to do 5 the last week. But instead of going from chapter 1, I'm starting at the middle of the book, where traditionally the discussion of Te occurs. Because in the most ancient copies that we have now, the book actually begins with a discussion of Te, and then brings in the discussion of Tao. So I've called it the Te Tao Ching, this particular translation. And the reason for making this shift is that Te is the least understood of all the concepts. The concept of Tao has been current in the West for a long time, and has been bandied about, as they say, or used, the Tao of physics, the Tao of management, the Tao of Pu. I mean, you can go on, you can get a whole shelf full of books now that are about Tao of this or that, the Tao of management, whatever it is. So many people have a sense of what Tao is. That idea of Tao is incorrect. To the Taoist, there is no idea of Tao whatsoever. If you have an idea of Tao, you're courting disorder. Not that Taoism is not discursive, it's highly discursive. It gave rise to science in China. But to have an idea of Tao is actually a misnomer. In Taoism, ideas occur in the 4th phase of a 5-phase energy cycle. Ideas occur in the mind. And it's true that the mind, in its naturalness, en natural, in its naturalness, the mind is indistinguishable from Tao. But as soon as you have an idea in the mind, you no longer have mind en natural, but you have a man-made artifice focusing and structuring the mind. And so we might call that a worldly mind. Certainly not a mind that is in correspondence with the Tao. In fact, the mind, when it has a symbolic structure activating it, the mind is consonant at its peak with Te, not with Tao. So that if you have an idea of Tao, more than likely that idea of Tao is actually applicable to Te and not Tao. So we're starting with Te because Te is difficult enough. And as we saw last week, the traditional Chinese understanding of this is quite different from the way in which Western academicians have approached it. And so almost any university that you would go to, the more famous, the worse, you find people with Japanese minds trained in Neo-Confucian thought talking about the ideas of Taoism. So that to someone who has understanding about Taoism in and of itself sees veils, not just an error or an erroneous thesis or standpoint, but like several levels of veils. And one can't even begin to talk to someone who has a multi-veiled intelligence in that way. So the traditional Taoist understanding is to go back and let the Tao Te Ching let its language flow. And so let's do that tonight. Let's come to chapter 43, chapter 42. We did 38, 39, 40, 41. And we reversed the order of 40 and 41. So it went 38, 39, 41, 40. And now chapter 42 is going to be in the 5th place of the first 5 chapters on the discussion of Te. So that as the classical Tao Te Ching opening with the discussion of Te, the first 5 chapters present an example in dynamic process of how this energy cycle works. So the 42nd chapter, the 5th one that we're taking, the 42nd chapter is called Tao's Transformations. Tao's Transformations. And I think I need to use my hands here. When there's a phase, the phase is occurring not by itself. It's not an isolated thing. Whenever a phase is occurring, it is also occurring with all the correspondent phases. Now, I used the phrase a year ago when I was doing the I Ching course, grandfather phasing, or if you like, grandmother phasing. So that whenever any phase is operative, all of the consonant phases are also operative. And any particular consonant phase can displace the operative phase instantaneously. So that the first, the third, and the 5th phases can displace each other instantaneously. Or, as Lao Tzu would say, the standard of Tao is the spontaneous. And in this understanding, the 2nd and the 4th phases can displace each other spontaneously. Now, the classic, earliest way of understanding how can this happen? How can there be an instantaneous displacement? The traditional Taoist understanding is that it's not one displacing another, but that the two, because they're in harmony, because they're vibrating in consonance, because their resonance is exactly in tune, they exchange places. It's not that this phase is displaced by a different phase, but it's that they exchange. They can exchange places and maintain the harmony, maintain the harmonic. It's like with a musical octave on a piano or a guitar. If, as long as you stay with the same shape in the octave, you can move up and down different octaves. Now, this quality is in the I Ching with fire and water. Fire and water are the middle terms of the progression of yang and the progression of yin. The trigram for fire, the clinging, li, has this broken line in the middle between 2 yang lines. And the trigram for water is just the opposite. It is the yang line in the middle of 2 yin lines. So that there is this quality where they can exchange with each other and operate in each other's continuum. And there's no hitch whatsoever. That is to say, the progression of yang operates with a yin trigram in the center of its continuum, and the progression of the yin operates with a yang trigram in the center of its continuum. So that the symbol of Taoism, the Tai Chi, expresses this by having the little circle of light in the midst of the teardrop of the dark, and the little circle of the dark in the midst of the teardrop of the light. That's fire and water. So that the Tai Chi symbol of Taoism graphically presents the exchanged positions as the normative. So that Taoism considers as a standard that exchange transformations are the rule of the day. They're not an exception. They're not an odd occurrence. They are what actually is obtaining all the time. Now, we talked about in the third of the lectures on the five-phase energy cycle that it was impossible in Lao Tzu's lifetime for most people to hear what Lao Tzu had to say. It took several hundred years before they could hear what he had to say. And you can only understand as much as you can hear. If your ear is not in tune, you cannot hear it. It's like someone who has no musical training. And if you take a guitar and you play a Bach chaconne on it, they will not hear the musical structure. They will hear music, but they could not whistle the theme, they could not hum the musical form, and they could not say to you whether some note was out of place, was transposed or not. But someone who can hear musical form can pick that up. Now, Confucius could not hear about the Tao and could not hear about the Te. The first level at which he could hear, the deepest that he could hear, was about Zen. And so Confucianism starts with Zen and assumes that Tao and Te are not anything that you could talk about discursively. And so they are just assumed. They're like assumed axioms. Notice that what is consonant with Te are the symbols in the mind. The symbols in the mind, the structure, the symbolic structure of the mind is consonant with Te. What is consonant with Tao is the human heartedness, the Zen, and also the world, the 10,000 things. So that one can speak in consonant terms of Tao being in nature and of certain human beings who live by their true self as having Tao. What is really actually being said is that this person who has found their true self and is living their life by this true self has displaced or exchanged places with the Tao, and also, in a way, exchanged places with nature. If they've exchanged places with the Tao is in them. And their true self is where the Tao is. So that the traditional Chinese say, such a person has become a spirit, a Shen. Now later on, in Taoism, by the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, there was a religious movement called Taoism, which is all about trying to increase one's longevity, trying for immortality, and it has a lot to do with alchemical elixirs. And Taoism also has to do with repelling bad spirits and attracting good spirits. And there are many rituals, like for birth and for burial and for marriage. And it's a regular religion. But the classical Tao is not a religion. Not a religion. It's a very precise way of understanding, a scientific way of understanding by correspondence rather than causality. by exchange transformation rather than by displacement, by complicated patterns of resonant dynamic rather than by static plans of applied structure. So that Taoism is a process. The Tao is a process. If I have exchanged, if I have attained my true self to such an extent that I do not have a worldly ego here, but just my deepest self, practicing Wu Wei perfectly, I can exchange myself with Tao, and the Tao will be here in me. And my spirit will be out in the zero base emptiness. If I have exchanged myself with nature, then my true self is in nature, and nature is in me. The 10,000 things. So that when it comes to the classical revival of Chinese philosophy in the 1100s, the big important name at that time was a philosopher named Chu Shi, Chuhsi, Chu Shi. And his emphasis was wrapped up in the phrase, the investigation of things at hand. To be able to see and investigate and inquire into things that are really here. About 300 years after him came one of the great geniuses of Chinese history and philosophy, a man named Wang Yang. He roughly lived about the same time that Erasmus lived in the West, from the 1470s to the end of the 1520s. So he lived roughly the same time that Martin Luther or Erasmus would have lived. Wang Yang is the great genius in Neo-Confucian thought. So that I'm going to give you a couple of sentences from this Columbia University Press book. A translation, Instructions for Practical Living and Other Neo-Confucian Writings by Wang Yang. He says, Chu Shi's teaching on the investigation of things is forced, it's arbitrary, and it's far-fetched, and is not what the investigation of things originally meant. Refinement is the work of achieving singleness, and extensive study the work of achieving restraint. Now, this singleness is the balance of oneself so that Te, the unity of Te, can work through you. If the unity of Te can work through you, if you are so balanced that you are transparent, and the light of Te can shine through you, what would it illuminate? It would illuminate the quality of your mind in its original nature. Now this is pure Chinese Taoist understanding, transposed after several thousand years into a very sophisticated philosophy known in historical terms as Neo-Confucianism. It so happens that by stating this process in this way, you have almost a mirror of what Buddhist meditation claims to do in the Mahayana. That if you quiet the mind down, the inner Buddha nature will radiate through your quiet mind, and what will occur then is this Dharma body of the true world. So that by the time of Wang Yang, the 1510s. The understanding of Tao was completely co-opted by its parallel with Mahayana Buddhism under the aegis of a Neo-Confucian revival and stated in brilliant, beautiful language. Wang Yang Ming's philosophic language is one of the great treasures of Chinese literature. Let's listen to Wang Yang Ming. The teacher said, "Our nature is the substance of the mind." Our nature is the substance of the mind. Notice that the gem is vibrant and harmonic with nature, the 10,000 things, the third and the fifth places in the energy cycle. All right? Our nature is the substance of the mind, and the substance of nature is our mind. They can exchange places. And heaven is the source of our nature. Heaven now, as the source, would be a Neo-Confucian expression of the first phase, the Tao. To exert one's mind to the utmost is the same as fully developing one's nature. Only those who are absolutely sincere can fully develop their nature and know the transforming and nourishing process of heaven and earth. Those who merely preserve their minds, on the other hand, have not yet exerted them to the utmost. Knowing heaven is the same as the knowing the affairs of a district or a country, which is what the titles prefect and magistrate mean. It is a matter within one's own function, and it means that one, in his moral character, has already become one with heaven. Serving heaven, on the other hand, is like the serving of the parents by the son and the serving of the ruler by the minister. It must be done seriously and reverently to please them, if it is to be perfect. Even then, one is still separated from heaven. This is the difference between a sage who exerts his mind to the utmost and knows heaven, and the worthies who preserve their minds and serve heaven. Now the distinction that Wang Yang Ming is making here is the distinction which was made in the 1st century in Alexandria about the difference between Jesus and the angels. The distinction was the angels are servants of God, whereas Jesus is a family member. He belongs to the family. He's not on the staff. He's not a servant. The same thing in Buddhism. If one comes to one's own Buddha nature, you are no longer a devotee of the Buddha, but you are yourself a Buddha. So the same thing here is stated by Wang Yang Ming about 500 years ago, and it has come up into our own time as the standard understanding, the subtle, intelligent standard understanding, which then is applied to Taoism. Almost all of the really sophisticated Chinese translators of the Tao Te Ching are devotees of Wang Yang Ming. Almost all of them. And hence they are really Confucians, or to put it more accurately, they are Neo-Confucians, who do not have an appreciation for the zeroness of Tao, or the undefinability of Te, other than just its simple unity. No distinctions can be made in Te. Now let's come to my translation. Let's see if we can make some of this work. In other words, to put it simply, you cannot know Tao as a thing. Tao is not a thing. Just like you know about your country or you know about your culture, you know about things, but you cannot know about Tao in that way. It is not objective. The only way that one can know Tao is to bring oneself into such equanimity that you exchange places with it. And when you exchange places with Tao, you can at the same time equally exchange places with nature. So that there is not a mystery, but there's a structure of harmony operative. There's something about man and nature and Tao that all three really are one thing. Now, when the Christian missionaries became very popular in China in the 19th century, the most harmless Protestant tract literature caused one of the biggest religious revolutions in Chinese history, known as the Taiping Rebellion. Because this very simplistic Protestant Christian tract pamphlet literature sounds in Chinese translation like the most sophisticated Taoist mystery understanding that the Trinity is one thing, and that loving one's neighbor as one's self, Jesus makes possible by coming into your soul. And in Chinese, the translation of these fundamentalist religious tracts sounded like the West was in possession of the most arcane mysteries imaginable. Because to the Chinese subconscious mind, this is how reality really works. Most of the educated literati were Confucians and Neo-Confucians, but the vast population of China is Taoist by feel, by nature. Let's come to chapter 42, Taoist Transformations, with this preamble, and see if my translation can evoke for you some understanding of what I've been saying. I'm going to follow D.T. Suzuki's breaking down of each of the chapters into thirds. So I'm going to hold up fingers. This will be the first third, the second third, and the concluding third. Chapter 42, Taoist Transformations. Tao produces unity. Unity produces duality. Duality produces trinity. Trinity produces the 10,000 things. The 10,000 things bear yin to embrace yang. The 10,000 things bear yin to embrace yang. Immaterial qi thereby makes harmony. Immaterial qi thereby makes harmony. Tao produces unity, unity produces duality. Duality produces trinity, trinity produces the 10,000 things. The 10,000 things bear yin to embrace yang. Immaterial qi thereby makes harmony. Zhen itself, which detested, is exactly orphaned, widowed, unrelated. Yet kings and lords thereby exact it for the honorific. So sometimes you lose itself but gain. Sometimes you gain itself but lose. Zhen itself, which taught, I also teach, The strong and aggressive ones resonate their death. Not I shall thus convey teaching's foundation. Okay? Let me go through it one more time and see if you can hear it. This is as close as I can come in English to the cadence and the sense and the juxtaposition of what Lao Tzu is presenting. He's showing us Tao produces unity. Unity produces duality. Duality produces Trinity. Trinity produces the 10,000 things. The 10,000 things bear yin and embrace yang. Immaterial Qi thereby makes harmony. Zhen itself, which detested, is exactly orphaned, widowed, unrelated. Yet kings and lords thereby exact it for the honorific. So sometimes you lose itself but gain. Sometimes you gain itself but lose. Zhen itself, which taught, I also teach. The strong and aggressive ones resonate their death. Not I shall thus convey teaching's foundation. We get what we are. Whatever we really are, that's what is attractive to us. Someone violent in nature will die a violent death. They attract that to themselves. Someone who is holding despairing thoughts will have despairing situations constantly occurring around them. Somebody who thinks in derisive tones will suffer this very phenomenon constantly in their own life. By changing, we change the whole harmonic that's going to occur. What is always there is that we will attract to us what we are. If we change what we are, we change what is resonant with us. So that chapter 43, entitled Universal Function, translates in this way. Again, a three-part division. The world itself, as most gentle, gallops and courses over this world itself as most hard. Hard things statically position themselves. It's like an inexperienced fighter will get his back foot all positioned and put some weight on the front foot so he can rock back, and he'll set his fist in just the right sort of way and flex his shoulders so he can get a good strong punch. And someone like that is a sitting duck for someone who can move fast. Because if you come in behind, you can, with just a swift movement on the wrist, you can break the hand or something like that. You can chop them up in many different ways by quick movement. Chapter 43 is saying, when the world itself is in its most gentle, that is to say, in its light-hearted effortlessness, it gallops and flows and courses over the world itself in its hard phase. So the gentle overcomes the strong all the time. Not because one is meek and therefore you inherit the earth. That's not it at all. It's that gentleness is extremely supple, mobile. Supple and mobile for what? For exchanging with its resonances. So that someone whose true self is really gentle can exchange with nature instantaneously, almost any time. Almost any time. The second part, one sentence. Non-existence enters non-penetratable. If you can't get in, then non-existence is in. If you close off a form so that it is airtight and nothing can get in, what has gotten in is non-existence. So, as Dylan Thomas said once about a good poem, you have to leave some gaps and spaces, some chinks in the structure for the lightning and thunder to come through. It's like American Indian rugs always have one thread that leads out of the design, through the background, and off the rug. It's called the spirit trail. It's foolish to the Navajo weaver to complete a rug and not leave some entrance and exit where spiritual power can come and go from the design. Only a fool makes a plan and bricks himself into the form. So the Tao Te Ching, in the second section of the 43rd chapter on universal function, non-existence enters the non-penetratable. So what you want to make sure is that the really important forms have a membrane which permits osmosis. You want to be able to have fresh air and sunlight come in and out. You want to have a kind of personality that allows for the resonant exchanges to happen effortlessly and spontaneously. If you can't get with nature in a really deep way, what has happened is that you have bricked yourself in, and what's occurring is non-existence in that bricked in, dead, static form. The third section. Not I, the not I. That is not my ego, but that which is consonant with the zero. That equanimity of myself which can exchange with the Tao, and has exchanged with the Tao, therefore it's not I. Not I, therefore, knows not doing itself. Now the Confucians always misunderstand this. They think that not doing wu wei is a thing. And there are learned treatises by famous professors that are quoted all over the place about the subtle phenomenology of wu wei. And there's no subtle phenomenology at all of wu wei. Not at all. Why? Because that gem which knows wu wei knows in an exchange the not I also. So the emptiness that occurs is not a vacuity, but it's a vibrant openness. One of the Chinese Zen masters' sayings is that when two Zen masters meet each other, it's like two open doors facing each other. It's just the wind blowing. When there's one Zen master in the mountains, in the forest, then there's the forest. But when there's two of them meeting each other, there's no mountains, there's no forest, it's just openness. Two open doors facing each other, and there's nothing else. So that always in the Chinese Taoist sense, which is at times almost indistinguishable from the Buddhist esoteric sense, when you have two Taoist masters at the same time someplace, they're usually chuckling or laughing. Like the two famous ones are the two that are sweeping the path, and they look at each other and there's no path, there's no brooms, there's nothing. And so they laugh and then the laughter brings it all back, and they're just sweeping paths again. But for instantaneous split second of eternity, by seeing each other in their just so-ness, they have both exchanged with Tao at the same time, and there's just their emptiness there. And so it's very funny. What is funny? Funny that we're back here sweeping this path, and we have been forever away somewhere else. So there's a sense of sublime and ridiculousness that comes in. The not I therefore knows the not doing itself. Having this advantage, no speakings itself's teaching is the not doing itself's advantage. In other words, no speaking itself, when it teaches, what would the no speaking, what would that be? It'd be like silence, right? But not just silence of not having anything to say. It's not the silence of having nothing to say. It's the silence, the roaring, resounding silence of not saying, of specifically not saying. So that someone can use a mind gesture. And you have profoundly not said anything. So that not saying itself's teaching is the not doing itself's advantage. In a reductive way, the phrases that usually came out is that one is not doing anything and not saying anything about it. It's a kind of a ridiculous, worldly, reductive way of speaking. This very profound truth. By not saying specifically means that you have disengaged the whole language function. And the whole language function is the foundation by which the mind has structures of ideas, and the world is thus given that shape. If you unhook the language structures purposely, the mind does not think thoughts, and the world doesn't have the structure that the thoughts impute to it. And what you do, instead of seeing your idea of the flower, you see that flower in its thusness. So, no speakings itself's teaching is the not doing itself's advantage. In this world, few interiorize the inner self. Few can interiorize the inner self, the exchange quality of exchanging for Tao, of exchanging with nature. Few can do that. This is what Lao Tzu is saying. The 44th chapter is entitled Setting Up Precedence. In other words, by using your consciousness, you can set up the resonant phases. By not seeking to force a causal connection, you can set up a resonance that will evoke the consonants. If I just doggedly want to push things around causally, I can only go so far. I'm limited, actually. I'm limited to how far my arms can reach, to how far the tools in my arms can reach. And in our time, it's unfortunate, but because of electronic extension of my arms, the causality seems to be really very effective. But when you look at the nature of electromagnetism, you realize that it can work either as a particle or as a wave. And if it works in terms of consonance, in terms of a correspondence, it works much better. The 44th chapter, setting up precedence. Name and person, which is nearer? Which is nearer to your person or your name? Person and treasure, which is more? Is your person more valuable, or are the treasures that you have in this world more valuable? So Lao Tzu has set up two disjunctives. One term of each of the two disjunctives is person. It's a shared term. He's saying name and person, person and treasure. Which is nearer, which is more. So now then he takes in an abstraction, in a very quick, spontaneous abstraction, he sums it up in a third line, which my translation is this: resonance and absence, which is painful. Okay, just relax your minds. Try and hold your shoulders up, hold your arms at the side, turn the palms out, put your legs down. Forget about the problems. Okay, now let the palms just turn in naturally. And let the shoulders relax to whatever height they need to be. Now you see you can quiet the body. Can you quiet your mind? Now Lao Tzu is speaking to the quietest evenness in you. And if you're fidgeting at all, you're going to pull magnetically the language offline and you're going to hear it wrong. You're not going to hear what's being said at all. But if I don't speak from evenness of mind, you don't have any chance ever in the whole universe to hear it evenly. So I have to keep speaking evenly, and you have to set yourself up so that you can receive it evenly. And if you do, the language will be a contact current between us. You won't have to wonder what it means. Its meaning will be what you hear. That's what Wang Yang Ming is saying. That's how we began this evening. Our nature is the substance of the mind. Our nature, our deepest nature, is the substance of the mind. But there's a problem that comes in. And the problem is one of distraction, of not being courageous enough to let the junk go, of not being direct enough to just keep to honesty. So Wang Yang says, only those who are sincere can fully develop their nature and know the transforming and nourishing process of heaven and earth. Those who merely preserve their minds by having really well-developed ideas and cultural shapes and given norms, though those who merely preserve their minds, on the other hand, have not yet exerted themselves to the utmost. They stop part way. Because if you've exerted yourself to the utmost, you've stretched your inner nature beyond the confines, beyond the veils, beyond the cultural givens, beyond the sociological mores, beyond the legal shapes, beyond the mental images, beyond the mythic horizon. And what you've done is you've emerged outside of their applicability. Now, you're not going to fall off the edge of the world if you go outside the range of this world's cookie cutters. One, because Tao is never contained in those shapes at all. It's always beyond and outside that. Nature is always outside that. Our true nature is always outside that. The unity of Te is always outside of that. So the question really to ask, well, what is in those things then? And the answer is that only what you have placed in there. And if you take out what you have placed in there, they are empty. There's no nature in there, there's no Tao in there, there's no Te in there, there's no you in there. But the Tao and the Te, the real you and nature, are all consonant, harmonious together outside of these. So if you're trying to live a full life and find your real self, in worldly terms, you're never going to be able to do it. And the very first step you have to do is you have to stop the habitual addiction of reducing yourself down and reducing others down, reducing nature down, reducing Tao and Te down to just the extent that you can reach with the given mores, the given myths, the given laws, the given precepts, and so forth. Knowing heaven is not the same as knowing something about the political district. Just because my section of Los Angeles has a supervisor named Michael Wu, it doesn't mean that my section is doubtless. It's just a political section of Los Angeles, as stupid as any other. It isn't Michael Wu, W-U. It's just W-O-O, just the name of a politician. It's not Michael empty sage-mindedness. It's not that at all. This is not to denigrate anybody. It's just to point out that already the Neo-Confucian thinking is sophisticated enough not to be misunderstanding some of what is being said here. But I'm taking it a step further. I'm showing you that even the best of the Chinese philosophic minds have no understanding of Lao Tzu whatsoever. They don't hear him at all. Not at all. Now, Wang Yangming is as sophisticated a philosopher as you can find. He's at least as sophisticated as Kant or Hegel or anybody in the Western philosophic terms. But he doesn't hear Lao Tzu. Hegel didn't hear Lao Tzu. Kant wouldn't understand Lao Tzu at all. Not at all. And it's not that Lao Tzu is anti-intellectual. He is like super intellectual in the sense that he's really understanding how the mind actually functions. How does the mind actually function? The mind actually functions as an exchange resonance with Tao. So that the pure mind is also Tao at any given split second, any nanosecond, any picosecond. So that I know Tao like my own true nature. There's no mistaking it. And that both those are resonant with nature. also. But I do not have a consonance with te or with the symbols in my mind. The structures in my mind are consonant with the power of te, with the virtue of manifest deliverability. And when the symbols in my mind are consonant with that, the symbols in my mind are fertile. They can make the world shaped just like they want to. If I have a mind powerful enough to understand E equals mc squared, I can make nuclear energy of that. This is not little speculative metaphysically. This is how things work. If the mind has the mathematical structures, I can make the world take the shapes of those mathematical structures. If I know the mathematical chemical formulas of polymerizing macromolecules, I can make a plastic that could be strong enough to make automobile bodies. And in fact, it's done. There's no way that those polymerized macromolecule plastics occur without the mind structure coming into play. So it's not that they're unnatural, but it's that they're consonant with te, the power to manifest. So the mind's structures are like a different braid that comes into play with Tao and Zhen and nature. So that te and the symbols interplay, they interbraid with Tao and our true self and nature. But the only way they can interbraid is if we have that consonance, and in fact that double consonance. If I'm not in tune with Tao, my mind's structures are not going to be able to be in tune with Te either. Because the only way that I come in tune with Tao, my Zhen and my Tao come in tune, is that the E, the symbolic structures of my mind, are also coming into consonance with Te. They come in together. And when Te is consonant with the structures of my mind, that's like the Yang. And when the Tao is consonant with my deepest nature, that's like the Yin. And when that Yin Yang are together, the world is whole in a real way, so much so that whatever ideas I have and use are completely natural. Even though I'm making objects that would not originally occur in nature, they are completely natural. When in Berkeley, California, during the 1950s, the first elements were being made beyond uranium, the transuranium elements. Those transuranium elements are completely natural. Even though they do not occur in, quote, nature, they occur in amplified nature, which can only be accessed by the power of the symbolic mind extending itself, so that Einsteinium or fermium or any of the transuranium elements occupy the same family of element structures that the natural elements occupy. And even though we've only made a dozen or so transuranium elements, there are as many transuranium elements as there are in the given nature, 92. So that one can actually predict, even though the power and the insight is not available in the 1990s to be able to carry it through, one could predict the next 100 or 200 years of making transuranium elements, and you could be very accurate because you can know what the periodic structure is. What I'm saying to you is that Lao Tzu is extremely profound. And when one talks about the Tao of physics, we have to understand much more than Friedrich Capra would understand about it. I must say this to you. It's almost like a sandbox compared to what can be really understood. For instance, just one indication. All of physics today is based on the electromagnetic spectrum, but there's at least as much applicability of the magnetoelectric spectrum, even though its frequency is about 10 billion times that of the electromagnetic spectrum. It is still within the purview of man's mind to conceive very accurately what those structures are and to bring them, because of consonance with te, into manifestation. Gravity is a magnetoelectric energy. One can do all sorts of things, all kinds of physics and chemistries and biochemistries that are not only conceivable but quite real, even though they have not occurred yet. So we're not talking about something which is old-fashioned. We're talking about ancient wisdom which is pristinely accurate, and when we can understand it in its pristine accuracy, we can put it into process in our lives. And it will work just as well for us as it has ever worked for any of the wisdom people, any of the Shams in China. So chapter 44, setting up precedence, or precedence. You can use either term. I like precedence. Setting up the precedence. Name and person, which is nearer? Person and treasure, which is more? Resonance and absence, which is painful? Neither. Unless one is forcing an issue. And if one is forcing an issue, then Lao Tzu says this in the second section of chapter 44. Extreme fondness forced is a great waste. Excessive hoarding forces intense absence. Excessive hoarding forces intense absence. Absence is not painful, but if you overdo and you realize that there is an absence and you clutch and you choke up because of that and try to hold on and you create an intense absence, that isn't just absence, but it's a product that has been forced. That's very painful. So the third section then comes back from these two warning lines. What are the two warning lines? Extreme fondness forced is a great waste. Excessive hoarding forces intense absence. Knowing consonance, nothing is despised. Knowing self, nothing is in danger. Enabled thereby, we last, we continue. Chapter 45, the last one that we'll take today, is called the Grand Te. Grand Te. And notice I'm not using any translation from Te. You just get used to using it, and its meaningfulness will occur as you use it. Grand Te. Great perfection seems imperfect. Its function is not worn out. Great completeness seems empty. Its function is never exhausted. Great straightness seems curving. Great skill seems ditzy. great eloquence seems hesitant. Motion displaces coldness. Quiet displaces heatedness. Purity, cleanness, are this world's calibration. The true measurement of the real is in terms of purity and cleanness. You can't say the world is so much 58% bad, 22% so-so, and maybe 30% acceptable. Why is the world's calibration purity? Why is the world's calibration cleanness? Or sometimes you could call it clearedness or clarity. The cleanness is actually what it is meant. Clean in the sense that this is as scrubbed and as fresh as can possibly be. Because what really occurs, what really exists, is not the disorder and the delusion and the illusion at all. They do not occur. They do not really exist. In this sense, they only seem to occur, they only seem to exist because previous correspondents are out of sync, are out of order. It's like a piano that's out of tune. Everything you play on it is wrong. You can't grab the notes and straighten them out and make them right. You tune the piano. If the piano is tuned, everything it plays is right. Where are the bad tones? They're no longer there at all. They only occurred because the piano was untuned. So when the human heartedness is tuned, how do you tune human heartedness? By equanimity. The Bhagavad Gita says, yoga is evenness of mind. When our equanimity is real, the world that we are in has this ordered quality to it. Someone else's disorder is not going to impinge upon our order. You say, well, that can't possibly be. That's an ignorant statement. That it can't possibly be is ignorant. I'm not speaking derisively, I'm speaking clinically, like a doctor would speak. Why is this so? Because when your consonance is harmonious with Tao, the world is harmonious with you and with Tao. It isn't just that your little private equanimity is going to be exposed to all this peril and this danger and be overcome. A human being who is in equanimity is in consonance with the whole Tao. All of that zero-based, forever eternal. And so one's world is not balanced on a precarious, iffy equanimity. But the world is a very tiny grain of dust compared to the enormity of Tao. And so one's equanimity is literally unshakable. Unshakable. Now this is a very peculiar quality because in our time the ignorance is almost complete. One can almost not find anyone who knows how to do this anymore, who knows how to live and bring equanimity in consonance with Tao into life in such a way that the world is ordered, and illusion and delusion simply fall away from it, cannot cling to it. They do not occur for the person, but the world made by that person does not attract that disorder, that illusion. There's a famous Buddhist sutra called the Vemma Nirdesa Sutra, in which there is an old man who is sick. And the Buddha says, my friend Vimalakirti is sick, who will go and visit him? And various people go to visit him, and they're all put into consternation because Vimalakirti is sick, and as soon as they come into his room, they become sick. So finally, the Buddha himself goes and sits down and makes himself at home. And Vimalakirti's sickness is that the world has been sick. He is mirroring the world. But when the Buddha comes in, his sickness is gone, because it no longer occurs there. He's mirroring the Buddha. Some of the people who come into this room find that there's a rain of flowers. And the ones who are still addicted to illusion, the flowers stick to them, and they're busy trying to brush these flowers off themselves. This contaminating rain of flowers, where those who are in the harmony, the rain of flowers is a fragrant beatitude. They're beatific. Because they don't see the flowers as some contamination that's sticking to you that you have to get rid of. It's a blessedness, a rain of blessedness that washes everything. It's not just an optical illusion. It's not just a mental belief conviction. It is in every way a scientific actuality of occurrence. And so let's go back and let's come here to the 41st chapter, Identity and Rightness. Let's see how this reads. We had this last week. Let's hear it again this week. Superior learners hearing of Tao are disciplined and practice itself. Average learners hearing of the Tao sometimes keep, sometimes lose it. Inferior learners hearing of Tao in a very big way ridicule it. If it were not ridiculed by them, it could not thus be regarded as Tao. Therefore, of those who build words, one says it, bright Tao resembles the dark. Advanced in Tao resemble the retreating. Straight in Tao resembles the roundabout. Superior Te resembles a valley. The perfectly unblemished are likely to be shamed. The amplest Te resembles non-sufficiency. Established Te resembles the unfinished. Simple substance resembles the changing. The biggest square of all has no corners. The biggest container is not yet ever finished. The biggest sound is void of voice. The biggest form has no shape. Tao hidden, empty of name, however exact, Tao can give and complete. And then the 41st chapter, which follows it, returning is Tao itself's movement. Yielding is Tao itself's function. Heaven, earth, the things, are resonant by existence. Existence is consonant with the empty. And then we would come to today's 4 chapters. Now, one thing you can do for next week, we're going to take chapters 46, 47, 48, and 49. Whatever copies of the Tao Te Ching that you have around, try and read just those 4 chapters, those 4 little poems, those 4 little hymns. And try for yourself just to settle into the language that is being used. And as you settle into the language, try and become aware. Is the author, is the translator aware of harmonious resonances? Does the translation have the intelligence of the consonant? Or is the translator trying to make a point, trying to make language say this, that? Because Lao Tzu's language never says this, and never says that. It always is presenting the full pattern of the way in which expressive language is one of the things, one of the 10,000 things. The words are one of the 10,000 things, which is in the 5th phase of the energy cycle. What comes after the words is not the meaning, but if the words have been positioned right, consonant with our deep equanimous mind, they will also be consonant with the Tao. And the words will flow back into Tao, and there won't be any need for meaning in the 6th phase. Because if you have to wonder what the words mean, you already are showing that you have a scrambled mind. If you have to wonder what the meaning is, you've already missed it. Have you missed it because the language is unclear? Most of the time, the language is unclear. Most of the time, the writers or the translators are so unclear that it would be a potshot miracle to have any enlightenment. And you can see how impossible, you can see how ignorance is an ultimate puzzle. Remember those Chinese puzzles where you put 2 fingers in, and the more you pull on it, the more that you're trapped and you can't get out? And the only way to get out is to put the 2 fingers together and patiently take one or the other out. And the more you pull, that Chinese puzzle is the Taoist expression of the conundrum of language. If you have to pull at the language to get the meaning, you've already lost the meaning. So you don't squeeze words to try and get the meaning out of them. You reposition your hearing so that you can hear the language. And if you reposition your hearing so that you can hear language right, you can tell what's wrong with language. You don't have to wonder what's wrong with it. You can tell what's wrong with it. So that the classic wisdom proof, the litmus test of truth, was always, can you speak truth? Can you, from your own self, spontaneously and originally speak truth? If you can, and you know what you're saying, then you are saved. And the form of truth was always the sacred hymn, the sacred song, the sacred poem. Because the form of consonant-minded language has always a very noticeable, particular, definite shape. It's always the shape of accepting openness. a form which discloses itself completely, spontaneously, and allows for folding back into the Tao, leaving no trace. Because if it folds back, if it returns back to the Tao without a trace, what's going to occur is just the Tao, and because the Tao is constant and exchangeable with ourselves, we will know because we will experience Tao, where we would experience our human heartedness. So if someone's language is true, it doesn't leave any record of illusion whatsoever. Nothing. So in a graphic way, if there are any exclamation marks and question marks, any periods, any punctuation whatsoever to one's language, you're still in grade school. In the Hermetic treatises, in the resurrection treatise of the Hermetic treatise, Hermes Trismegistus says to his, quote, son Todd, prepare yourself because now we're going to let language go. And in this cascade of truthful speaking, it will outdistance both of our abilities to keep track of it. And we have to go together in the flow of that language. Neither of us are going to be in control. And that's the way truth is. It outdistances the cookie cutter, clumsy language that's based upon ignorance and illusion. It always overflows. Here's how Grand Te, the 45th chapter, translates. Great perfection seems imperfect. Its function is not worn out. Great completeness seems empty. Its function is not exhausted. Great straightness seems curving. Great skill seems ditzy. Great eloquence seems hesitant. Motion displaces coldness. Quiet displaces heatedness. Purity and cleanness are this world's calibration. So try chapters 46, 47, 48, and 49, and we'll see how we can do next week. I'll make a Xerox of all the pages for us so that we can have the Chinese characters. And you can begin, I think we'll try in 2 weeks so that you can begin sounding out some passages of Lao Tzu. Because when you sound it out, the pronunciation, even though your pronunciation may not be all that accurate, you show me an academic who can speak 5th century BC Chinese. There isn't anybody. But we can get close to the sound. And just even getting close to it, you can appreciate how Lao Tzu's language runs in such a way that each of the characters is like a single vowel sound. They line up in such a way that it's like a staccato that disappears into the multiplicity and becomes like a flow. But it's not the flow of one thing only. It's the flow of millions of little meteors of language. So that Lao Tzu's rhetorical style is like a shower of comets. It's a pyrotechnic display of virtuosity. It's like someone who is playing a solo partita of Bach's on the violoncello and is playing each note so accurately in all its articulateness, it sounds like a flow of a single sound. But it's really the motion of a million little arcs of the bow. And that's the way Lao-Tzu's language is. It is a pyrotechnic display that the overall gestalt of it is that of a waterfall of truth. And this is why the legendary origin of the Tao Te Ching is that it was given to Yin Shi, the keeper of the Hankou Pass, in one breathless dictation. And that the original Tao Te Ching had no divisions of chapters. That was made about 50 BC by the Han, the Roman Chinese. Han Dynasty Chinese. There were no chapters. There really was originally no sense of punctuation. So that the hearer themselves had to make the punctuation. And so that the characters, when they come into juxtaposition, if you're not developing a creative, accurate gestalt of the words as they are, if you're trying to figure out their meaning to put punctuation in, you have missed it completely. You haven't heard it at all. This is a sacred language, then, and it's the way in which sacred language, when it's spoken, resembles an endless sound. I guess maybe the easiest thing that might be approachable for us is some of the recordings of like Tibetan Buddhist chanting or traditional Pali Buddhist chanting or high medieval Gregorian chant. It's like an endless ongoing pattern of wholeness. It's close to, but exactly opposite of what static would be. Static is endlessly confused, whereas sacred language is endlessly, seamlessly accurate. And it's only because we're not able to discipline ourselves to receive such accuracy that we don't hear it. We don't hear it at all. Ignorance does not hear truth at all. And the more that we bring our equanimity into play, the more the whole consonance of Tao and nature occur for us, the more that Te and the mental symbols of structural understanding are able to braid together, the more that we come into this kind of equanimity, the more we bring into play the ability to let truthful language occur in us. And usually what happens is that it's not that there's someone who hears someone else, but it's that the two together hear and speak at the same time. Try those chapters. Thank you.